وثلاث ورباع فإن خفتم ألا تعدلوا فواحدة أو ما ملكت أيمانكم ذلك أدنى ألا تعولوا وآتوا النساء صدقاتهن نحلة فإن طبن لكم عن شيء منه نفسا فكلوه هنيئا مريئا ولا تؤتوا السفهاء أموالكم التي جعل الله لكم قياما وارزقوهم فيها واكسوهم وقولوا لهم قولا معروفا وابتلوا اليتامى حتى إذا بلغوا النكاح فإن آنستم منهم رشدا فادفعوا إليهم أموالهم ولا تأكلوها إسرافا وبدارا أن يكبروا ومن كان غنيا فليستعفف ومن كان فقيرا فليأكل بالمعروف فإذا دفعتم إليهم أموالهم فأشهدوا عليهم وكفى بالله حسيبا صدق الله العلي العظيم. Surah An-Nisa is the fourth surah of the Qur'an, and it is a Madani surah, meaning it was revealed in Medina. And because it was revealed in Medina, it talks about how to establish a Muslim community. In particular, in every community, there are members of the community who are vulnerable members of the community. And the society has to make sure that they take care of their rights and that their rights are not abused. Because there's a new community that is starting, but in their minds they still have the culture and the remnants of the previous community, the deviations of Jahiliyyah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to remove these deviated ideas and replace it with the ideas of Islam and replace it with the importance that should be given to human rights. Now, in every community, in some communities, for example, some of the most vulnerable members of society are children, and from children there are orphans, and amongst the orphans, especially the girls more than the boys. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these first few verses is going to talk about the rights of the orphans and the rights of women in particular. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind. Some verses of the Qur'an, Allah addresses the believers. Some verses of the Qur'an are universal messages for all human beings. Allah is addressing all human beings. Ittaqu rabbakum. Be wary of your Lord. Which Lord? Alladhi khalaqakum min nafsin wahidah. The one who created all of you from one soul. Which soul? Two interpretations over here. First, the soul of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, or he all created you with one type, one genus, one humanity, one Homo sapiens species. وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا, and he created from that soul its wife. There is a discussion amongst Muslim scholars. In Christianity and according to Christian traditions, Eve was created from the rib of Adam. There are also some ahadith that you find within the Muslim scholars and within the Muslim books, whereby it does say that yes, Prophet Adam was created from, or Lady Hawa was created from a part of the body of Prophet Adam. However, there are so many ahadith which actually reject this. They say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Lady Hawa independently, and when the ahadith reject this idea, they reject it very strongly as well. I remember reading one hadith where somebody came and presented this idea to the fifth or the sixth Imam to say that Lady Hawa was created from the rib of Prophet Adam. He said to him, you think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not able to create a human being without using another human being's body? God couldn't do that. So, what does this verse mean? It means that Allah created our spouses, the women or men and women from the same type. They're both Homo sapiens. They're both human beings, There is no distinction in that sense between the two of them. Meaning what? It's a very important message at the beginning of the surah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing us theologically. He's saying men and women are both human beings and they both deserve human rights. Very simple. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً. And from them God created many men and many women. All of humanity came, okay, from them, or humanity came from them, let us say that. One of the discussions that happens in the Tafseer over here is how were there so many people who came about? So Adam and Hawa had children, and from their children were brothers and sisters. Who did their children marry? To be able to have more children, more children. Cousins can marry, but brothers and sisters can not marry. In that time, were brothers and sisters allowed to marry? That's one question they asked. Or some ahadith mention that they were huris, or they were people sent from paradise. Allah created certain other human beings for them. That's the second opinion that is held over there. The third opinion, also a very interesting opinion. Some of the mufassirin, Natla Nasr Makaram Shirazi mentions this, says that when Prophet Adam was there were other human type species as well. Or prior to them, they were human beings or people who were like human beings, and perhaps they intermarried into them. He mentions that as a possibility, even though he rejects it, but he mentions it as a possibility. Three different possibilities. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَاءَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَامَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلَيْكُمْ رَقِيبًا. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَآتُوا الْيَتَامَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ. So, during the time of the Holy Prophet, whenever there was an orphan, they wouldn't send them to orphanages. There were no orphanages at that time. A man would come and take the orphan and take care of her or take care of him. And Islam highly recommended that. Sometimes there's a misconception out there because of the laws of Islam about adopting orphans. People say in Islam you're not allowed to adopt orphans. Who say it? You are allowed to adopt orphans in the sense that you can be their guardians, you can take care of them. The Prophet of Allah says, أَنَا وَتَكَافُلُ الْأَيْتَامِ كَهَاتَيْنِ فِي الْجَنَّةِ. I and the one who takes care of the orphan are going to be like these two, so close to each other in paradise. Yes, Islam says the orphan will always maintain the family name. The orphan is not going to, for example, have mahramiyat to the parent, and we had a discussion about that earlier as well. But people were taking care of orphans. However, sometimes they would abuse the orphan's right. In what sense? They would see that this orphan has a lot of inheritance that it has inherited. I will take care of the orphan. In the name of taking care of the orphan, they would take away all the inheritance. Or sometimes what would they do? In their inheritance, there was a good piece of land. This man has a bad piece of land. He says, you know what, this bad piece of land, same square meter, I'll give it to the orphan. And that good piece of land, I'm going to keep it for myself. Allah says, وَلَا تَتَبَدَّلُوا الْخَبِيثَ بِالطَّيِّبِ. Don't replace that which is not worthy, or that which is worthy, with that which is not worthy. And do not take their money and keep it to yourself. إِنَّهُ كَانَ حُوبًا كَبِيرًا. There was a man during the time of the Prophet for which this verse was revealed. He had a brother had wealth, his brother left behind an orphan. This man, he said, I'm going to take care of my niece. He took her wealth. When she grew up, she said, I'd like to have my wealth back. The man said, no, I get to keep it because I took care of you. This verse was revealed to say, that is a great crime. Huban kabira means a great crime in the eyes of God. This man immediately came to the Holy Prophet. When he heard this verse of the Qur'an, he says, A'udhu billahi min al-hub al-kabir. I seek refuge in Allah from committing such a great crime. وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تُقْسِطُوا فِي الْيَتَامَى فَانكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُمْ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ. One of those controversial verses of the Qur'an. Let's go through this one. Now, back then what used to happen is they would take this young girl into his house. When she would grow up, he would decide to marry her. And not only would he marry her, but then he said, now I'm married to her, she is my wife, her property, my property, take all of that property and use it for himself. Not only that, but in return, the mahar that he would give to her, he would give something very insignificant, would not even give to her. And he would not even take care of her, because the only reason he wanted to marry her was to be able to take use of her wealth. So he himself had his own wife, he would be taking care of her, but he just kind of got married to her to take care of her wealth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals this in the Qur'an. And he says that if you don't think that once these orphans grow up and they have become baligha and rashida and they agree to marry you, but you don't think you're going to be able to be fair with them, then don't marry them. Allah has allowed you to take on a second wife, a third wife. These are not my words. These are words of the Quran. Mathna, 2, wa thulatha, 3, wa ruba, 4. When Allah has allowed you to go and marry independent women, why do you want to come and do dhul to an orphan lady who's now grown up into a young lady, into a lady? Why do that? No. Some scholars of the Quran in the past, they could not understand the relationship between these two things. That if you can't do, for example, fairness with orphans, then go and marry other women. So they came and said that maybe a part of the Quran was lost over here. This idea is known as tahrif of the Quran. And scholars of the Shia scholars, do not believe in any tahrif of the Quran. No part of the Quran is lost. No part of the Quran is extra. No part of the Quran has been changed. Mathna wa thulatha wa ruba. فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. Even there, when you get married to second or third or fourth wife, if you're afraid that you won't be able to do justice between them, فَوَاحِدَةً, then just stay with one. أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, or your slave girls, but not more than that. In fact, there are other verses of the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, now that's interesting, when the Quran mentions that you should be just and fair to them, there's even discussions amongst Islamic scholars that if you buy a gift for one wife, then do you have to buy a gift for the second one? Then it says, well, if you bought for one something that's worth, let's say you bought a ring for her, well, you have to buy a ring of similar value for the other one as well. I remember one example one of our teachers gave when we were studying the Kitab of Nikah. He said that sometimes a person has, two wives who have two different needs. Let's say one needs, okay, for the lack of a better example, pardon me for this example, one needs 1 meter of clothing, and the other needs 1.5 meters of clothing. One needs one, the other needs 1.5 meters. When you buy for them, you still buy for both of them 1.5 meters of clothing. Then there's another verse of the Quran that says, no matter how hard you try, you will never be able to do justice between 2 wives or 3 wives. Now how do you explain that? So the scholars explain and they say, when it comes to loving, you may not be able to do justice and love them the same. This is part of human nature. But when it comes to taking care of them, their finances, their sustenance, you have to be able to do adala between them. Otherwise, you're not allowed to take a second wife. Then Allah says, ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى أَلَّا تَعُولُوا. And it's better that you only have one wife so that you do not oppress anybody. So what does Islam say about polygamy? Number one, Islam says that Islam prefers monogamy and not polygamy. Secondly, if a person is going to be polygamous, at that time they used to marry more than 4. You can only be limited to 4. Third, if a person is going to be polygamous, then they have to be fair between the wives. That's the third point that Islam makes. And fourth, Islam does recognize that at some times a person may want to or may need to have a second wife or a third wife. And for that reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made an option for that in the Quran and Islamic Sharia. وَآتُوا النِّسَاءَ صَدُقَاتِهِنَّ نِحْلًا فَإِنْ طِبْنَ لَكُمْ عَنْ شَيْءٍ مِّنْهُ نَفْسًا فَكُلُوهُ هَنِيئًا مَرِيئًا. The next discussion is about mahar. Mahar has 2 words in the Arabic language. The first is mahar. The second is, if you remember from the Sigha of Nikah, أنكحت موكلتي موكلي على المهر المعلوم, and sometimes على صداق المعلوم. صداق, the plural of صداق is صدقات, صدقاتهن نحلا. So what used to happen? A person used to say, how much mahar do you want? $5 million? Okay, fine. Give an example. Okay? $5 million, very well. But then, after he would get married to her, she would say, where's my mahar? He would say, I used it up on you, for example. Or I used it for these things. Or sometimes what used to happen is the mahar, instead of being given to the lady, would be given to her brothers, her uncle, her family. Or sometimes what used to happen is 2 families got married into each other. For example, one gave a daughter to the son, and then the other gave a daughter to the son. they would say, you know what, it cancels out. There is no more mahar. Right? Because our family was supposed to give mahar to your family, but on this wedding, your family was supposed to give mahar to our family, so the accounts are balanced out. Allah says this doesn't matter. Women have their rights. One of the rights of a woman that makes her financially stable, and therefore one thing I do mention whenever I recite nikah. Sometimes, for example, somebody comes and says to me, the mahar is going to be 12 blue flowers or 12 blue roses or something like that. Or somebody came and said, well, the mahar is going to be $5 or $10. I say, no. In a marriage, the mahar has to be something of value. At least $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Yes, Islam does not set a particular mahar. It doesn't say that it's got to be $100,000, $200,000. In some communities, unfortunately, that is a problem. On the other hand, Islam also does not say that mahar should be something so insignificant. It's just something symbolic that you can neglect. No, mahar was there to give the lady financial stability to some extent, to give her strength to some extent. So Allah says, give them their mahar nahla, as a gift to them, and it is their gift to keep. Now, if they allow you to make use of the mahar, that's a different story. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُؤْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمُ الَّتِي جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ قِيَامًا. Now, sometimes you want to help somebody, but if I give them $100 or $500, they may not know the best way of how to spend it, either because they are not mature enough, or they are not old enough, or they are not good at making decisions. In Islam, a person is either aqil, meaning sane, or his majnoon, meaning insane. And a majnoon also has certain laws in Islam. There's a third category mentioned in the Qur'an and Hadith. Safi. The plural is sufaha. He's a person who's not insane, he's sane, but cannot always make the best decisions for himself. For example, whenever he buys something, he pays more for it than he's supposed to pay for it, right? This person is a safi. What if such a person comes and asks you for money as help? What do you do in this case? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, one, you don't have to give cash to them, because they might go and waste that money. But two, that doesn't mean that you don't help them. Allah says no, rather give them clothing that they need to wear. Give them rizq that they need to eat. In these days, for example, when somebody comes to you, you give them a gift card, or you tell them, okay, I'll pay for your rent, or you tell them, okay, I'll pay for a bill that you have. Allah is saying, if you don't trust that they're going to make a good judgment with the money that you're giving them, that doesn't mean you should not help them. That means that you should help them in a way that you're sure the money is being used in the right way. وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. One of the most important conditions of giving sadaqah and charity is whatever you do it with respect. If you cannot respect a person when giving sadaqah to them, Islam says don't do it. Because more important than a person's financial status is their dignity in the community. The imams used to be so careful about it. Sometimes a person would come to ask for sadaqah, the imam from behind the door would give it to him. Somebody would ask Imam, why are you doing this? He would say, this person would feel ashamed and embarrassed to look me in the eye, so I don't have to make him look me in the eye. Sometimes the imam in the middle of the night would go and leave the money over there. Why? Because he didn't want the person to have to stretch their hands. So Allah says, however you talk to them, whether you decide to give to them or you don't decide to give to them, وَقُولُوا لَهُمْ قَوْلًا ma'rufa. Speak to them with good words. One more verse left, but inshallah we'll do tafseer tomorrow night. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا حسن المصطفى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. السلام على الحسين وعلى أهل الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبا الحسن علي بن موسى رضا كن شفيعنا